George, thanks very much for having a chat today. Let's start with your financial turnaround. Now, Western Sydney have some really challenging finances. Can you tell me a little bit about that story?
Sure. Look, sadly, we're no different to many in the sector. And if you look at the new statistics put out by Universities Australia, it talks of nearly half of the sector being in deficit for 5 years, and we weren't different to that. And we were hit really hard by some of the domestic recruitment challenges, by the cap on international students, and the numbers just didn't add up. So last year we went through a really tough process for our people. We started with cutting 1 in 4 of our senior leaders to make sure that the cuts started at the top. We went through line by line our budget, we cut our consultants, we cut our travel, catering, and that made a big difference. But in the end there were job impacts at Western Sydney University. We lost a number of people, about 190 people, but all voluntary redundancies in the end. So,
can I just pick up on that? Sorry to interrupt, but I know we've talked about this a little. People see the headline figure for number of jobs lost, but I know you found it a very challenging process.
Yeah, look, as a leader, I found the process really wrenching. I really struggled last year at different times, and as I said to my staff, there are a number of people who reached out to say, "Are you okay?" And I really appreciated that because I felt very keenly the impact on our people. And even though the people covered by the enterprise agreements that were voluntary redundancies, these are, loved team members, people who leave a large legacy at our university. We didn't have a choice. We have to live within our means, but you can't deny the human impact, including on the leaders who are part of it. So I feel, we've got through that process. We turned it around by about $80 million. We're now in a financially sustainable position. And I feel very positive and optimistic for our community. Having got through that, we're in a position we can now grow with a strong platform and provide people the security that they rightly deserve in their employment.
Something that we've seen over the last few weeks is there's been some headlines, I think, in Sydney about the wealth of the sector, looking at the aggregate of the surplus, $2 billion odd. But we know on an institutional level, it's a really different story. How are you going, and do you think that message is getting across? Because clearly you're not coming from a position of there's millions around the corner just to spend.
Well, and we're absolutely looking after the battlers in Sydney, that's for sure. What we've got in Australia is a 2-track system in higher education, both for students and for universities. And when it comes to students, it's those who can afford to go to uni and those who can't. And we often are dealing with the students who hunger is their daily problem, or just the ability to afford medicines and the like. On the other hand, there's many students, including, I'd say, my kids. The bank of mum and dad gets them through university. So there's 2-track for those students. But that's reflected in the system itself. The universities who are most likely to be catering for the students who struggle are themselves often in the most financial distress. And the universities covering more of the elite, the students who don't need the help, they've often got the stronger finances. So there's a shakeout between the two different parts of the sector, and that's really unhealthy, particularly when you have universities in the most financial stress are the ones who need to provide the biggest financial learning and other support to students. And it's one of the reasons I support the ATEC stewardship. We need something that's more focused on delivering for students and community and evening out some of those problems.
One of the things we've seen discussed here over the last couple of days and ongoing in the sector is needs-based funding, and also the Accords targets. It's going to cost more to educate students who don't normally go to uni or might have spent 20 years out of education, and it must, by definition, those students tend to cost more for support and so on. How are we dealing with that, and do you think that we have the right approach at the moment?
Look, I don't think we've got the right approach. Something has to give, and I think actually the Accord has a good blueprint for how to take it forward. But if you look at the metrics, we're not on track to meet the 2050 target. In fact, in key areas, we're going backwards. You look at the position of young men who in catastrophically low numbers are going to university, less than 1 in 5 in Queensland, less than 1 in 5 in Tasmania. You look nationally, 62% of all uni students are female. So women are making smart choices for longer term earnings, jobs and the like, but young men often are not going to university in the numbers required. And of course, particularly from low SES, we've seen about a 10% decline in low SES students going to university. And that's catastrophic for a country that's about a fair go and giving everyone a chance for higher education. We've actually got the most in-need cohorts of higher education too often now not coming. And that's JRG, it's a number of factors. So something's got to change. In fact, a number of things. Fixing JRG is one of it. I think more articulation with TAFE is a key part of it. We need people to start off in vocational education, have a really seamless, strong pathway into university. And there are a number of things like that that will make a big difference. But if we don't make those changes, we not only will not make the target, we'll become a much more unfair and regressive country.
So does that mean government have to stump up a whole lot more cash?
A lot of it actually isn't to do with cash. If you look at TAFE articulation, for example, I actually think that's the sector. There's a lot within our control, and we shouldn't be painting ourselves as victims of a system. We've got agency in this, and we need to argue for the changes. So when it comes to TAFE, it means working on recognised prior learning, making it easier through pathways, and universities recognising the value of a TAFE program and saying that that deserves credit, and actually giving them credit that will save students money and time. Some parts, of course, are government. I mean, the JRG is the big part. I've described this as one of the top 5 worst public policy decisions by the Commonwealth this century because of the amazingly negative and unfair impacts it's had upon Australia and young people. And that was a government decision. It was put through Parliament, and the sector, rightly, is now standing up and saying it needs to change. And government has imposed that. It needs to change it, not only for the students, but also to bring fair value back to arts degrees and other forms of learning that at the moment, and the whole system is designed to turn people away from.
I know law obviously close to your heart. I've heard there is a significant drop-off of low SES students into law, whereas more affluent students can still go. Have you noticed that at Western Sydney?
Look, I mean, the data's in about law, and if you look at law across the sector, and that's an area where we really need people from disadvantaged backgrounds who've got the lived experience, who know how the law can be really harshly upon people. And if you look at the last 5 years, the number of low SES students doing law has decreased by 17.7%. So it's gone down nearly 1 in 5. At the same time, students from other cohorts has gone up. Now you've got to ask, what's driving such a big difference? And one of the main reasons is in law is in that top category, $52,000 for your law degree for just the 3-year law component. And if you've got price-sensitive people, cost of living, poor backgrounds, essentially we're pricing people out of their dreams in ways that have the biggest and most negative impact upon people who frankly should be doing a law degree.
We talked earlier about this being perhaps one of the most turbulent years in policy for the sector in decades. What's your health check sense on where we're at for the sector, and do you have optimism for how the year's going to pan out?
I'm optimistic, but I'd say we're on the cusp of change and we don't have the answers yet. And this may well be the most impactful year since the mid-1980s when we had the Dawkins reforms, and that's because entirely new funding system. I'm confident that we're heading in a good place on needs-based funding. I'm hopeful on managed growth. I think it's important to get the ATEC up, another big systemic change. I think the system's been, really characterised by a lot of market failure, and it's a market the way it's constructed. It's not often served students as best it should. There's a justified need for government intervention, as happens across many industries. And if we can get those settings right along with students, community, this could not only be a really volatile and impactful year, but one that really will be seen as a watershed moment for higher education as we reassert the public purpose of universities and have systems, incentives and structures that actually direct universities to serve the community, as opposed to systems that drive us in all other ways that, by design or otherwise, often end up with market failure.
Which brings us back perhaps to that the thoughts about the 2-track system. Can we do that with a 2-track system? And is the 2-track system possibly desirable in the Accord looking for diversity in the sector? Is that a desirable thing?
I don't think it's good to have a 2-track system, because I think with something as basic as education, it should be ready and available access to every person. We should have a system based upon opportunity. We should be a country where everyone, if they work hard, has a chance to go to uni, to get a great life, a good job. And that shouldn't be based upon privilege. And it certainly shouldn't be based upon the money your mum and dad have got. But that's the system. And of course, it's not just built into higher education. It's tax, housing. So many of these things are stacked against people and are now about intergenerational transfers of wealth as opposed to people making their way up the tree through social mobility. So if we really believe we want to be a country of the fair go, egalitarian, then we need a system that's not 2-track. It actually says hard work, opportunity, everyone's got an equal and fair chance to get ahead.
And then just bringing it back to the Western Sydney experience. So how are you preparing your staff for the year? We know it's been a really tough year for Western Sydney, as you described, but tough across the sector, lots of burnout. What are you putting in place to help them through this time of transition?
Yeah, look, the starting point has been an exhaustive process of town halls across all of our campuses. We've done 9 of those and 1 online for our overseas campuses as well. And I think transparency is the first point. We've got great people. People need to know where we are and staffing, the dollars, all of those key things. And the key message is that it's really tough last year, thanking people for their hard work and commitment. But we've now stabilised the ship. You know, we're in a good position now, and we're really lucky in Western Sydney University. We've got one thing that no one else has got, and that is we're the only uni dedicated to Western Sydney. It's 10% of the Australian population in our region, about 2.6 million people, third biggest economy, fastest growing, youthful, entrepreneurial, diverse. And I feel amazingly lucky to be in this region because our mission as a uni is to serve that region, to be the uni the region needs and deserves. And if we fulfil that, well, by serving the community, we will thrive. And so I feel optimistic and positive, and I'm just raring to get going with our people, whether it's AI, student experience, retention, big plans, and I think, you know, big opportunities at a time of change for a uni like ours to step up and do things differently.
Just one last question, which strikes me while listening to you. It seems that one of the challenges of leadership for a VC is, in this situation, to say, I don't have all the answers, and I'm going to have to work through it with you. Have you found that is the way forward?
I do not have all the answers. That is absolutely right. In fact, when I arrived, I said that I don't come in with a polished plan. And I'm a big believer in crowdsourcing from uni communities. I knew our people had the ideas, and they did. Even our strategic process really ground up. And by embedding it in the wisdom and knowledge of staff and people with strong connections to the community, you come up with better ideas, and you also get the buy-in as well. You know, this is our collective plan. But I'd also say, quite apart from no person's got the plan, I mean, no one knows what the world's going to be like in 5 years. As generative AI rolls out, new technologies like quantum computing, we know the pace of change will probably pick up. And so often the best thing we can do is say, well, there is no fixed target here. The sector is changing. It's about agility, resilience, adaptability. The mission doesn't change, serving students and community, but we've got to be open to very different ways of moving forward. And the next few years will really test institutions. Do they have the agility, the capacity to change, given the technological and other societal shifts that we're going to be facing?
Fantastic. George, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Tim. Anytime.